Hey, I'm Alex Radical from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Seers Catalog from Bezier Games. Seers Catalog is a 2 to 5 player trick-taking game designed by Taylor Rayner, who actually has his own channel, I believe Taylor's Trick-Taking Table if I'm not mistaken, and so you might say he's familiar enough with the genre. Despite what this Seers Catalog seems to imply, it's not about Seers Catalog like Sears the store, it's Seers Catalog. There's a little werewolf peeking in at you from outside, and you are playing as a bunch of Seers. Yeah, that's a Seers Catalog. It's a little inside baseball over there. This is a 2 to 5 player trick-taking game, more specifically a shedding trick-taking game, where the goal is to get rid of your cards, but with a little bit more nuance than that, because you're not trying to get rid of everything, you're trying to get rid of enough that you can score more than the person who gets rid of everything, which might not make sense yet, but hopefully it will soon. The game will play out across 4 rounds. It plays 2 to 5 players, as I said already. You're going to have to distribute the cards differently depending on the player count, or having different sets of cards, different suits of cards, but in general, players are going to get a hand of cards, plus they're going to get a wild card, plus they're going to get 2 artifact cards. You have 2 artifacts from a giant deck, well, giant's relative, from a whole bunch of artifacts. You're going to have a wild, which is a 2 to 13 of any suit, and then you're going to have your actual hand of cards, which are going to have, well, in this case, set up for a 3-player game over here, so we're going to have 3 suits in play. Looks like I got a single gray over here, and then the rest from the other 2 suits. Now, in this game, you're trying to get rid of your cards for the most part. Let's just focus on how the game plays, and I'll talk about the scoring, and that will all make sense, well, soon enough. Let's go ahead and put our 2 artifacts into our hand. I have the Go First artifact over here. We all have a wild, and that means I'm going to go ahead and figure out what I want to play. Let me just look at my hand over here, and I won't spend too much time on this. I think I'm going to start off strong over here, although that may or may not be the best way to do it, but I'm going to start off strong, playing out a 2-3-4-5. There we go, a 2-3-4-5. That's one of the 3 types of cards you can play, types of hands you can play. You see, you can either play, let's find if I can play something else over here. There we go. So there's a few things you can play. You can play a single card, starting off with any number over here, let's say a 5, and then players can try to beat that high card. That's one type of hand. Alternatively, you can play a pair or triple or quadruple of cards, although it depends on the player count and the cards you have in play, but I can play 2 11s, and then someone else can beat that with a higher pair. It has to be specifically be a pair, so a pair of 12s or a pair of 13s, or you can play a run from the same suit, and again, someone can beat that with a similar run from whatever suit, doesn't be the same suit, but a similar run that has a higher run value. So 2, 3, 4, 5 can be beaten by a 6, 7, 8, 9. You're going to go round and around until all players but one have passed. That player wins the trick and starts off with the next trick. Which means, as you play cards, you're trying to figure out what the right combination of cards is to actually clear your hand of cards. The twist over here, the thing that's going to make this game interesting, is that you're trying to actually have some cards left in your hand. You see, when another player fully runs out of cards, that player will score 0 points. So if you get rid of your cards first, congratulations, you have 0 points. And you're like, that sounds like a bad thing. It's not, but it's also not a good thing. You see, it's not uncommon to end a round with negative points, so getting 0 points is already a step in the right direction, but it's not necessarily a step enough in the right direction. You see, your score at the end of the round, assuming you have 6 or fewer cards in your hand, when you get down to 6 cards, you're going to flip this token, showing that you are eligible to get the bonus. The bonus is the fact that you're going to score your lowest card in hand at the end of the round. So for example, if my final hand is a 3, 7, 9, well, I'm going to score 3 points for the 3 because it's my lowest card. But I'm also going to lose a point for every card I have, and I have 3 cards, which means I also end at 0. Where you're trying to get points is by having a final hand of, let's say, an 8 and a 10, because then you lose 2 points for the 2 cards, but you'll get 8 points for having that 8. Or the best hand would be having a 13 as your only card left in your hand. You would score 12 points for that hand because, 13 points minus the 1 point, and that's what you'll score, those 12 points. Now, you lose the negative points regardless. Whether or not you're scoring the bonus, you're going to lose the negative points, which is why I say it's not unusual for you to go full negative. Whether you're scoring a low bonus or whether you don't score the bonus at all, you'll end with negative. So clearing your hand entirely is a good 0 points. Nothing wrong with 0 points, except if you can get better than that by holding on to a single card throughout the round, by being able to hold on to those cards. Part of what makes this tricky is normally during the game, you have the option to try to preserve the right cards for the right moment. So if you play a 5 and I could beat it with an 8 in my hand, I might not want to because that 8 might be part of a 7, 8, 9, 10, which is great. A 7, 8, 9, 10 is a great run over there. I can go ahead and play that, so I'll choose not to play the 8. The tricky part is once you get to the point where you get this bonus, once you are down to less than 6 cards, you're going to flip this. You are now eligible for the bonus, but you also may not pass. If you are legally able to play a card, you must now do so. And that means that your 7, 8, 9, 10 is going to be broken up up because you have to play one of those numbers. If I go ahead and play a 7, and you can play one of those numbers, you have to follow it up with a higher number. You have to play any legal play that you're able to do so, regardless of how it messes up with the other cards in your hand. Which is tricky because, as I said before, you're trying to hold on to cards in your hand. So if I have a 2 and a 13 in my hand, obviously I want to get rid of the 2 because I can hold on to that 13. But if you play a 3 and I'm going next, I have to play the 13, much to my chagrin, because those 13 points would have been awesome for me, but I can't hold on to it. So there's this interesting balance of trying to control the game flow, trying to control the cards you have in your hand, not actually going out earlier than other players, but having few enough cards and hopefully high scoring cards in your hand. Now this is all made easier with the fact that you have this wild 2 to 13 over here. That gives you a lot of flexibility. Play this too early and you can possibly control the early game. Play it too late and, well, playing it too late can be helpful because you can then control for what you're playing, but if you play it too early, you get the control of the minigame. So it's basically two pros, either early game control or late game flexibility, but that wild is going to be very helpful. And then you also have wilds. All these wilds over here, and keep in mind, in general, there are exceptions, but in general, if you end with your wild or an artifact in your hand, then you're going to get 0 points. Doesn't matter. If I have a 13 and my wild in my final hand, that's considered to be 0 points. All the wilds and artifacts, unless stated otherwise, count as 0 for final scoring. But the artifacts are going to give you different abilities. Abilities that will either help your final hand, abilities you can play them with other cards, abilities to break suit, different things you can do that will give you different ways to mix up the game, and so there's never really a guarantee. You play that 13 because you know that you can go ahead and get that high card in, well great, someone might have the highest card, which is a card that is always the highest card. So there's always some degree of flexibility or some degree of lack of being able to fully anticipate what's going to happen. Knowing the artifacts in play will help, but sometimes surprises will come your way. You're going to do that across 4 rounds of play, scoring every single round, and seeing who gets the final score at the end of it, but that's the basic idea of the game. A hand shedding game where the goal is control and some degree of hand shedding so that you are eligible for scoring when the game comes around at the end, but trying to make sure that you're able to actually not go out first, but also not get penalized too harshly. And that's that. Let's go ahead and dive into the rules. Starting off with ease of play. Ease of play is great on this. Very, very short rulebook, very clear. They have a separate pamphlet for the actual artifacts because these do require clarification. Most of the artifact cards themselves are not good enough. In fact, one of the I'll do this when I get to the cons. I'll do this when I get to the cons. We'll come back to that rulebook over there. But in general, the rulebook is very straightforward. Game time can run a little long. Again, I'll come back to this later. But you're playing across 4 rounds. I think I would have preferred it to be maybe 3 rounds instead. The 4th round feels a bit too much. But with that, let's go ahead and dive into what I like, don't like, and conceal that's not liking. Starting off with what I like, which is in general, this is a great shedding game that has a strong twist of the fact that you are trying to get rid of your cards, but also not trying to get rid of your cards. Which that gives you a bit of a toss-up of trying to figure out how do I preserve my best cards, my highest cards, which usually give me flexibility in controlling the hand and who's leading the next trick. Those cards are going to be very helpful in the game, but they're also very helpful for the scoring. But also if I struggle too hard to hold on to those games only to have to play my 13 because you forced me to play a high card at the end of the game, there's a limit to what you're able to get done, and trying to figure out the right tempo of the game, the tempo of your hand, what you can combine different ways, how to use your artifacts and your wild at the right time. It is a strong challenge to figure that all out, and forcing people to play their hands, their high cards, is very, very satisfying. Watching someone get down to their 3 cards and you can see how confident and cocky they are, but being able to force them into their suboptimal plays because they have to get rid of their cards can be very satisfying. So that little aspect where you may not pass, which again, that's how you're eligible for scoring in the first place, but the fact that you're now locked in, there is a degree of control in play and you're trying to play around that control. If you end the game early enough, you might get 0, other players can get negative points, because if you can drive fast towards an early game close, then sure, 0 points might not sound like a lot, but if your 2 other people at the table just got -6 apiece, -7 apiece, and they weren't even eligible for scoring, well, that's great. You're up 0. Well, you're not up 0. You're at 0, and they're now in the negatives. So there's a lot of different tempos or ways to play the game based on how the game state is going. The wild card gives you a lot of flexibility. The wild card is going to give you just a ton of control over, you have more optimal plays or more flexible plays, either early game or late game, but learning when and how to use is going to be a big part of the strategy. And again, predicting it around how the game flow is going. The fact that you have all these artifacts in play, and you only see a handful of artifacts game to game, but there's a whole bunch of artifacts that will all give you these different abilities, different things you can do, that both add a degree of chaos, but also add a degree of variability to the experience as far as what thing are you going to be able to add to what is otherwise a traditional trick-taking game, but with powers and abilities thrown into the mix for better and for worse. So I like the artifacts and the variability those provide. I think it's a good number. It's not too crazy as to be just pure chaos, and it's not so small as to lack variability. Once you have a few games under your belt, you can kind of start predicting like, oh, there's always a chance he's going to play the high card or that half-point number or be able to switch suits. There's always something you can do, and you will learn them fairly quickly. As far as what I don't like in the game, first of all, just kind of touch back to that rulebook aspect over here. The artifacts do not have enough text on them, and what I mean by that is sometimes I would look in this rulebook for a clarification on what an artifact does. This is a separate rulebook that covers all the artifacts. So sometimes I would be looking for a clarification. That's fine, I'm okay with that. Other times, I would look it up because it's the first time I encountered it, and it wasn't even a clarification thing, it's just me just checking off my bases and whatnot. Sometimes things that are not said on the artifacts, and you wouldn't necessarily assume that, but like you might think, oh, the artifact does this, and you have to go into here to even possibly find out that it doesn't, but you may not have chosen to go into here because the artifact seems straightforward. I don't know if I make myself clear on that one, but I guess the way I'd say it is, some artifacts don't seem to need clarification, but there are extra things in here that aren't stated on the card, so I do recommend checking this up every single time you play an artifact, because otherwise you might play one or two of them wrong. That's a small little negative there. I'll say that the game kind of needs if a player is ahead by X win condition or something. And what I mean by that is sometimes you get to that third round or that fourth round and someone's up by 15, 20 points and it's just not possible for somebody to really get back into it. And I don't mind losing games. I really don't. Neither me nor the other player is fine. You're stuck here for another 7 minutes in a game that you're not winning. That's okay. The part where it's tricky is there are times where the math works out that a player is in the game and they can't possibly win, and that can produce weird edge cases where, well, what's the game plan here? Am I trying to king make? Because no one really wants to king make, but am I trying to play optimally? Am I trying to tank your points? It can produce this perverse incentive if you are no longer eligible for winning. I think the game would benefit from some sort of, if a player is ahead by X, maybe they win, or some structure around that. Those are complicated to do right because effectively one really strong losing player can force two other players to basically have to call it mid-game, but the alternative is you get to a third or fourth round where somebody has a lack of clarity over what the right way to play the game is. So I think the game would benefit from something along those lines. And lastly, I'll say, at the end of the day, bad hands are still bad hands. One of the things that many trick-taking games do is they give you the opportunity to bid around how many tricks you're going to win. So it's not just about how good your hand is, but it's also about how well you're able to deal or predict around what you're able to do. This game doesn't have any of that. You're just trying to play the best you can with the hand you're given. The wild will give you flexibility, the artifacts will give you flexibility, and the tempo of knowing how to play things will give you a good amount of skill into the game. But at the end of the day, a bad hand is still a bad hand in this game. Fortunately, you're playing across several rounds, so hopefully it won't affect you too much on average, but at the end of the day, it's still a bad hand. As far as what I can see others not liking, first of all, the artifacts. I like the artifacts. I think it's a good mix as far as the numbers. I think they add variability without too much craziness, but you might like trick-taking games and you might like the general concept of this game, but the artifacts might feel like things you can't control or predict around. It might feel like too much chaos. I think there are a few ways to mitigate around that if you want to. First of all, you can you always have the for who goes first artifact in play, but the others are random. You always could have it so that the players know the artifacts that are in play, so you can show over the artifacts. Here are the 6 artifacts in play. Now let's go ahead and shuffle up and deal them out. That would give players at least the anticipation or the awareness, so there are things you can house rule around it, but if you don't like the chaos of powers and abilities, there are definitely powers and abilities over here. I'll also say that the 4 rounds feels a bit too long, which I touched upon already. I do think the 4 rounds for me, I think I'd probably play this at three rounds in general. The reason it's in what I can see others not liking and not a problem for me is I'm probably just going to play it as a 3-round game and call it a day. It doesn't affect my experience. It doesn't make the experience worse. I'm just going to go ahead and call it a 3-round game, play it that way. So it's more what I can see others not liking because I've already solved that problem for me. As far as final thoughts on Seers Catalog, this is... Oh, let me do one last thing. As far as one last thing I can see others not liking, the theme is weird. The idea that it's like Seers Catalog is cute and all that, but then it's really just seers and witches and covens and all that stuff. That's an interesting thematic choice because I can see this not appealing to people, and then the secret witches they get appealing to people. The problem is you have to know what you're getting, and the reverse is true as well. I can see this appealing to people, and then they suddenly find out it's a game about witches, and then you're thrown off guard. So it's an interesting choice to almost semi-disguise a game in a way that's like, ooh, what is this game that's not at all what it appears to be? doesn't bother me, but you may pick up this game and get a game you like less, or thematically, or not pick up this game when really there's a game here you like. So that's an interesting approach there. As far as final thoughts on Seers Catalog, I really enjoyed it. One thing I should talk about as well that I didn't give enough credit to is it also plays really well at 2 players, which is something that's hard to do with trick-taking games. 2 players is a more cutthroat experience. It's a really cutthroat experience because you really comes down to just the 2 of you going head-to-head and trying to card count or play it out as optimally as possible. There's a lot more control. It's a very different experience. Playing it at 2 is a very, very different experience. Equally rewarding, possibly a bit more thinking, a bit more card county, pros and cons to it, but it's a really solid game that I think that I was not expecting a lot from this, although I should have, because, again, Taylor Rayner does have a lot of experience in this field, but it was a good shedding game where the part of the twist for me is that you're not actually trying to be the first one out, you're trying to hold on to cards, but dealing within a system that's going to force you to play cards and give you a mix of powers and abilities that really keep the game rewarding and interesting and variable as you play it. I really enjoyed it. It's a 4 out of 5 for me. That's going to be Seers Catalog from Bezier Games. As far as other game recommendations, if you are looking for another game that had an interesting set of, another shedding game that I really enjoyed that gave me vibes to is going to be Teach You. I really enjoy Teach You a lot, and the general sequences of plays, the own weird powers and abilities that game has. I definitely recommend Teach You, especially if you're playing it as a 4-player game in teams of 2. And then also it reminded me of Scout. Scout from Oink Games, I want to say. Scout is a delightful game that definitely had that hand-shedding mechanism with different twists that kept that one interesting, but if you like one, it's probably worth checking out the other. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you appreciated this video, hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.